Everybody to take a seat and we're going to start. Okay, so welcome to this fourth lecture of the web technology class. Today we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to step a bit away from the technological lectures, and this is a lecture also on a special topic, two related topics actually, web accessibility and device independence. And I hope and assume that by the end you'll also see some more reasons, extra reasons on why we ask you to use these semantic markup for semantics and syntactic CSS markup for making the page look nice. And there's another reason, and those reasons will be discussed today. So in that case, it's very much related. So I hope you learned something there. Again, there are slides made by Chris Schreiber, and I will also tell you a little bit about why this is actually a lecture that was used to be very close to Chris Schreiber's heart later on. Okay, so like I said, it's basically two topics that I'll be talking about: web accessibility and device independence and responsive design. So one is more from a universal access point of view, and another one is from a design perspective. So the device independence and is probably a term you've heard before, or responsive design. Okay, but we'll start with web accessibility. Okay, so what is accessibility in general? It's to ensure that your content is accessible to everybody, right? So we are not the same, nor you nor me. There's all kinds of different people here. You are mostly young, so that's one homogeneity of you. But there are actually old people as well, and there might be people with conditions that restrict access or might make it hard for them to access content. So, talking about blind people, visually impaired people, deaf people, people with cognitive disabilities, people around the world, right? So this is the idea of making stuff accessible to everybody. And similarly, that means that content is separate from device. Right? It doesn't mean that one piece of content can only be accessed through one device. So we have computer screens of various sizes, but we also have voice browsers and mobile phones. So we'll be talking about all of these things and how they relate. And one thing is, why do we want this in the first place? I mean, it's just nice to do, right? But it also matches this core concept of the web, which is the concept that Jacco actually sort of talked about when he talked about Tim Berners-Lee and why the web works. Why the web works? One of the reasons is its idea of universal access. It doesn't restrict you in publishing information by setting up binary formats, by making stuff proprietary. You know, this idea of universal access actually made the web the thing that it is today. Made it as large and open and usable as it is today. So this principle is not just us being nice, but it's actually a core component of why it works. And that's why we need to make sure that it keeps working, and that's why we need to think about web accessibility as a special case of this universal access. Okay, so universal access, immediately we have to already conclude that we can never do real universal access, of course, right? So this is an ideal. This is something to strive towards, but it's never something that we can test. Do we have universal access? Does everybody in the world have access to the web? Well, we already know that the answer is no. Actually, we won't be talking too much about this lecture, but the majority of the people in the world do not access the web. Those are people that are not living here in Amsterdam, but mostly in, for example, West Africa or Southeast Asia in rural areas, right? So it's never going to be completely universal, but it is something that we can actually strive for, to approach this thing, and to make sure that the designs that we do, that we make, right? So the web is not a bunch of nature's laws. It's something that we create as web technologists, right? So it's something that we can change. If you see something's not working, we can just improve the technology and add another layer to it and make it work. So this idea of approaching universal access is something that we can strive towards. Okay, so this is the three websites. Oh, you okay?
Yes, okay.
Okay. So this is the free website. This is not the one that you see now, but it's actually the one from the year 2006, 2007. And this is the way that the person who made these slides, Guus Schreiber, used to see the website of the VU, his employer. So Guus Schreiber has visual impairments, which causes him to need to enlarge these fonts, and then he can read it. But this is what happens when you use the Ctrl Plus button on your laptop or the enlarge fonts. Right, so it's fairly to completely unreadable. So this means that the free website in 2006 at least was very hard to use for someone with visual impairments, if not impossible. And we're going to have a look if the free learned and see if they did that. You can already think a bit about what you think. Right? But okay, so it's not as bad as it is here. But this is a problem, right? So what can we see? We can see that people with certain conditions use certain tools to view the same content that you are also interested in, and they're restricted from doing so by technological things. It's not that they don't want the current dean of the faculty to actually access the stuff, it's that technologically it doesn't work. Okay, so how can we make it work? So before we dive into the how, we look at the why. So why do you want this as a content provider, as a university, or as a municipality, for example? So there might be legal reasons. These are very compelling for people to actually do it if you can get sued. So the Netherlands doesn't have a really suing culture, but in other countries you can actually get sued if you don't comply to specific access rules, right? And the same holds here. If you can't get into this lecture in your wheelchair, then if you're disabled, you can actually tell the university to make sure that there's a ramp here. And the same should hold, the same universal access should hold for lots of other public services such as universities. So in that sense, there might be a legal reason why you can't restrict people from using your reaching your content. There's also an economic benefit, right? If you get access for more people that might want to buy or be interested in my product, that's a good thing. So I can just reach my customers. And the third one is actually one that we're looking at now. Is actually it's sort of a test whether you are doing the right thing anyway. Right, so what we're going to see today is that if you adhere to these principles of web technology, web design, then you're basically almost 80% there anyway. If your stuff is accessible to everybody, then also it's more accessible to users without disabilities. Okay, so there's another reason from this guy. Who knows who this is? And why is he here?
Superman. He was in an accident and became paralyzed in a horse accident.
Thanks. So this is Superman, the actual original Superman. Yeah, or he played Superman in the early movies. And he got into a horse riding accident and is now paraplegic. I'm not sure if that's the official term, but he is a proponent of making stuff accessible, right? So in the US, he's a strong advocate for this. You don't have to reach all this, but what he says is the web actually is a place where disabled people can actually connect with other people in the world, because you have this digital means of communicating. So where sometimes it might be hard to actually get in your car and drive somewhere and interact with other people, the web is actually a lifeline for these people. So it's extra important that we make the stuff accessible and we don't put up unnecessary additional barriers.
He actually is dead.
Oh, he's dead now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I think it's like 2 years ago or something, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm assuming his quote is still true, so yeah, thanks for that downer note. Okay, so this is about the legal issue. So like I said, in the Netherlands, there's not really a suing culture, so you can tell the university that they should build a ramp, and then they probably will do it. And if they refuse it again and again, you probably can get into a long legal fight. But in, for example, the US, there's actually a strong current where businesses are hastily implementing policies that are determined by the government, considering accessibility, because otherwise they will be quickly sued, right? If your bathroom in a restaurant is not accessible for people with disabilities, then you can, as a disabled person, directly sue that business, and you can force people to implement these changes. Right, so this is to a certain extent true here, but in a larger context, it's even more true. Universities also have the same thing, right? So this is Penn State University, which was actually sued, but here also at VU, we know that people have been demanding the right that they have to actually come here and follow the same courses as you do, without any restrictions. So this website that I had up is unacceptable. So again, we'll see what we did. Okay, so what's the problem, right? So websites are designed by people and made by people, and sometimes they get paid for it, sometimes they don't get paid for it. But one thing is that there is an assumption that everybody is the same, that there is a user and this is a perfect human being without any restrictions or without any, let's say, compromises, and they can actually develop websites for this person. Of course, that doesn't exist. So we know that we're all different, and we know that there are people that don't easily read or are able to perceive things that for a majority is very easy. For example, not everybody reads stem point text very easily, or is able to interpret and read images quickly. Not everybody uses standard input-output devices, for example, keyboard and mouse. Right? I think the majority of people now are already using more touchpads, so does it still work for touchpads? But then again, there's a lot of people that use other devices, and we'll have a look at them later. Right, so all these are assumptions that are made by designers, often in good faith, but still it's good that you at least are here in this room are now aware of this, and you will never do this again. Right? And what's important is that these assumptions are not true for an increasing percentage of the population. Why increasing? Because actually there's a lot of elderly people who are starting to use the internet. So it used to be that, I don't know, within our age group, your age group, sorry, 95% of people would use the web, and in other age groups it would be much less. And now that's actually changing. So there's this percentage of people 70 plus that are using the web is actually approaching this 90 to 100%. Right, so it becomes even more important as we speak. Okay, so there's another reason why it's not happening, not because of people are not willing to do it, but because they think that usable web pages are ugly web pages. So if you give something to a designer, he or she will make a nice flashy web page and think about accessibility later. So there's a prejudice that they can be ugly, that they can be really expensive to make your website accessible, that it's actually very hard, or that I don't need it. So all of these things are at least somewhat mitigated by using sound principles of design that we'll talk about later. So there's a nice Dutch website which exactly addresses these issues, but you can probably find others as well. Okay, so we've been talking a bit about types of disabilities, but maybe we can together come up with types of disabilities and how they might hinder your using the web. So I already told a few. So I talked about visually impaired people, blindness and visually impaired, which is not the same thing. So that's a free one that I give you. But what kind of other disabilities might restrict the use of the web?
Being deaf.
Deaf, yeah. So hearing impaired or complete deafness might restrict the use of the web, especially where only where audio is used. So very good, thanks.
Do they give motor control on their fingers?
Yeah, motor control is our motoric disability. Thank you. And there's a fourth class. Oh, that was not the. What's that? A fourth one.
A mental handicap.
Yeah, so we call them cognitive disabilities, I think. Yeah, so these are the four main classes. So we have visual disabilities, blindness, low vision, also color blindness. And if statistics don't prove me wrong, there should be at least a few colorblind people in the room today. You don't have to raise your hand. But this is a very common one, and it might not be a disability, but we'll look actually at an example where it might actually hinder your usage of the web. Right, auditory ones, so hearing impaired, motor disabilities, and cognitive disabilities. Those are let's say the four classes that are identified by the people thinking about this. Right, and consequently, making your site accessible means making your content four things, which is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Right, so perceivable means that means that your audience, your users need to be able to get information from the device and perceive them, right? Through one or more multiple senses. Right, so this requires thinking about what the content is and writing it down in the semantic format and then allowing for multiple ways of perceiving the same content. Right, and it's not just one way, it's actually two ways, so operability, so we need to be able to interact with the content, with the tool. Right? Most of the web pages are no longer static, but are interactive in some way, so I need to be able to actually do things and change the content. Right? So I need to be able to deal with multiple interaction methods, input methods, to be able to deal with people that have less user control or might take longer over certain tasks, like clicking a button, or that recover from errors that they make. Right? Things that your average perfect user might not do, click on the wrong link. Nobody has ever done that, of course. And how do we then recover from this link in a sensible way? So it needs also to be understandable, so this is slightly different. So it needs to be that the information or the content on this website needs to be clear and understandable for multiple people, depending on how it's written down. So this is more about how you write content. And also nice is the robustness. So that means that if your stuff is designed for one platform, a website or let's say a desktop site, you don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years, or what kind of new cool technologies can be invented to help people with disabilities or otherwise. So making your content robust, reusable, clearly identified what is what, ensures that your stuff is accessible also in the future. Right? And adhering to standards here helps a lot. Okay, so we'll go to an example. So this is the color blind example. So there's a lot of websites that do some version of this, right? So click the green button if you agree, and click the red button if you disagree. And obviously for people with green-red color blindness, which is only one form, this is a problematic thing. Right? So again, there's probably one or two of you here that don't even see what I'm talking about. Green, left is green and right is red. Right, so a better solution, which doesn't require any more text or any super complex things, is this one. So correct, make your choice, continue or cancel. Right, so people that perceive color can easily click green or red because it sort of adheres to commonly accepted color coding. And people who don't perceive it can still use the same tool. So it's still operable and perceivable for people with this specific disability. Or disabilities, maybe a big word. Okay, so we'll dive a bit into a very common type of assistive technology to show you what these type of assistive technologies are and how people are actually using the web in ways that you might not first expect. So screen readers are already quite old and are heavily used. I think this is among the most used of assistive technologies. These are tools for blind or visually impaired users that actually read the screen to the user, right? That's why they're called screen readers. So obvious limitations to this technology are that images can't be read up till now. So it might be that with the recent advances in image recognition, we can actually get a bit farther. But up till now, screen readers do not read aloud images, so they don't interpret them. Otherwise, visual content in your website, so borders, arrows that might be weird and wonderful, and tables are problematic, right? Because how it's for a visual user, it's very easy to identify pieces of content in a table by extrapolating, but for people that have a disability, tables are just basically very long lists of numbers or data. I'm not 100% sure what I meant by keyboard accessibility, but yeah, often there's keyboard input added, so people can use keyboards, and that's actually how they can interact with the screen reader. So it's not just reading from back to front. And here, this is very important. Here, semantic markup is actually used by the screen reader to present the website and the interactions that the user can do on the website to this user. And I'll show you an example on how that works. hope that we don't get.
Welcome to this presentation on how headings help screen reader users. My name is Greg Krause, University IT Accessibility Coordinator at NC State University. So how are headings used by screen reader users? Well, there are two main benefits that headings provide. First, it allows screen reader users an easy way to skim the page, to basically see what the major points are on the page. Second, it lets them easily jump from section to section within a page. So let's see an example of how this actually works. So let's say this is the first time you've ever come to this page. Just by glancing at it, you can skim the page really quickly and get the feel for what this page is about. You can see that the title is the NC State University IT Accessibility blog. You can already see 3 stories: Google Apps Accessibility Guidelines, FAQs for ICT Accessibility Regulation, and creating accessible PDFs in Microsoft Publisher. You even see some blocks over off to the right for some categories of information like recent posts, categories, archives, and contact. All that information, you can gather that in just a matter of seconds. And the reason it's easy to do that is because there's been a layer of visual information added to the page. Some text is been made bigger or bolder, or the background color has changed to show where the important points are on the page. And that's what lets you visually jump very quickly from section to section to see what are the important parts of this page and get an overall feel for the content of the page. So if you were a screen reader user, how would you experience this page if you didn't have these visual cues of where the important sections of the page are? So here's a plain text version of that same page. And you can see it's much harder to find where one story begins, where one ends, or where different sections of the page are. You would in essence have to read through the entire document before you get an idea for what the contents are, and then you'd have to find out from cues from the text where something might begin or where something might end. So coming back to our page that is marked with headings to indicate what all the important sections are, let's hear how a screen reader user would actually encounter this page. And the way that a screen reader user is going to do this is they have a simple key combination that they can press to quickly jump from heading to heading within a page to be able to, in essence, skim the page.
NC State University IT Accessibility blog visited link heading level 1. Google Apps Accessibility Guidelines visited link heading level 2. FAQs for ICT Accessibility Regulation link heading level 2. Creating Accessible PDFs, Microsoft Publisher visited link heading level 2. Recent posts heading level 2. Categories heading level 2. Archives heading level 2. Contact heading level 2.
One thing to keep in mind is a screen reader is only able to jump from heading to heading within a page when you have actually denoted within the document where the headings are.
Right, so this is the point I'm trying to make, right? So and this is actually an answer to questions that you might have on why am I using this semantic text if I can also use other text to make it look the same way. That's because not everybody can look at it, right? So in this case, the heading tags are used by different technology to bring the same content in a very similar way to different types of users. Right? This is how it works. And what also the video showed is if you don't do that, if you just read the text out loud, it becomes very hard to use. So this is an example of what would happen if you don't use this headings.
Breaking news, world news and multimedia window, sections button, search buttons, internal link, list one item, link, end of list, login button, settings button, list three item, US, link, end of list, frame, heading, list one item, Thursday, link, end of meeting, list 12, link.
Right, so these are links and these are image links. So the reader doesn't know what's in those links.
Heading level 2, top news. Heading level 2 link. U.S. Attorney Lawrence Cuomo on ethics.
Right, so here we're getting at the content that is understandable. But now there's all these links and the machine doesn't know what type of links there are or how to deal with them. Okay, so screen readers. So this JAWS, I think that's the one that you heard. What do? So they allow you to use key combinations to browse pages in certain ways, to skim articles, or to list items of a specific tag. And they also tell you whether something is a link or not. even if it's in the graphic, right? So they take the A tags and they say, well, there's a link here, or a visitor that you heard. And they then read aloud the alt text. So this is an attribute of the A link that allow you to specify what this link is about, right? And if it's not there, if it's in the image, if it's not there, it will not know what to do with it. So images that don't have alt links are black boxes, right, or for the screen reader. Right, so tabbing from link to link or from header to header is a way of skimming web content. So just as with heading markups, it's important also to make your links work, because this is a way people actually maneuver from site to site, from a web page to web page, sorry. And that's why the tag in between, so between the the link start tag and the A close tag needs to be meaningful text. Right? So if you have click here every time that you have a link, then all you hear is click here, click here, click here, and you don't know what to click. What's better if you say, please read more on the webpage about Penn State University, and then the webpage of Penn State University is the actual content of the link element. Right, so then it makes sense to skim these pages using just the links. And what they can also do is reorder the page. So take the semantic markup of the page and reorder them in a way that might be more informative to users of screen readers. And you can only do that if you have actual semantic markup. So even though you can use semantic markup to make your page look nice for, let's say, the 90% of people that can use it in a visual way, if you do it well, then these 10% of people that might use technologies like this can also access the same information, not quite in the same way, but at least they can access it. Okay, so screen readers are not the only ones. There's also other types of assistive technologies, such as screen magnifiers. Everybody who uses Windows has this built into their bureau accessoires apps, so the small apps. So you can actually enlarge text. And if you don't use actual text, but you use images of text that might be a bit low resolution, you might run into problems, right? So another good strategy is to use real text instead of images of text. You can also override all kinds of nice things like providing high contrast version of the page if you want to do so, and don't do that, right? So even though you might, as a designer, you might want to control exactly how people are looking at your website, from a interaction designer perspective where you want people to actually use the content, you don't want to restrict how people can actually access that. Horizontal scrolling is also annoying. I think everybody thinks that's annoying because it's unexpected, and you can actually not see everything what's happening here, because often scroll bars are in the bottom, and if you're starting in the top and you can only see a small portion of the screen at the same time, you might not even know that there's stuff on the right. Right? So these are sort of common things. So what's always better is if you make this again sort of responsive design. Device independent, and then you have a lot of these things covered. So that's how it sort of ties in with the next topic. Right, so also if you use screen magnifiers, you might not see if you're changing something in the top and something, if you're clicking a button in the top and something changes in the bottom, which is cool stuff you can do with JavaScript. You might not be able to actually perceive it because you can only focus on a small part of the website. Areas outside the screen magnifier might change, but you might not be aware of it as a visually impaired user. So talking about JavaScript in general, there's all kinds of additional things that happen with very dynamic web pages. Most of them are sort of covered by the principles for HTML non-dynamic web pages, but there's a whole range of things that might cause problems that we can't go into detail too much. There is some documentation on how to do that, but you can imagine that forcing people to do these kinds of things where something happens somewhere else, or so you have to click very quickly and then you have to move your screen magnifier. Those types of interactions are not useful for people that have a hard time reading the entire screen in a split second, right? So don't assume that your user is able to use it in the same quick fashion as you do, because this is how you design your web page. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about videos as well. So video is becoming more and more popular. for a long time now, it's been the majority of content in terms of bytes, it's actually video content. You might want to assume that people have plugins. I think this is less and less of a problem as more videos becoming available as HTML5 actual web content rather than weird Macromedia Flash objects that you might have to have a plugin for which your screen reader or your assistive technology might not work. So by more and more embedding this within the common web stack, we are making this accessible for assistive technologies as well. Auto start, so videos that start once you load something. I think everybody finds that annoying, but it might be especially annoying if you're dealing with cognitive disability, for example, or if the page starts explaining you what to do and you can't hear or see that particular piece of video. Right? So don't make it an integral part of your experience if this is something that you want everybody to use. Right, so you can actually add keyboard controls, and I think if you use HTML5 video, you have all these baked in. So again, adhering to web standards makes your stuff accessible from the get-go. Okay, so for people that are hearing impaired, captions are really useful. So 2 years ago, when I also presented this, YouTube didn't have this wonderful caption functionality, which has gotten a lot better. So now it's to the level where you can actually use it, even though, let's say, 20% is still nonsense sometimes. For the majority of non-YouTube videos, it's still there's still a lot of captions that are not made. And in closed captions. Right, so this is really for hearing impaired people. You don't just caption speech, but you also caption sounds that are important to understand. Right, so if you watch Netflix, you can sometimes turn on English subtitles or English closed caption, and closed caption is actually different from the other one. So if that's important to you, you can actually do that. So there's a link to YouTube captions, how you can make them, how you can actually improve them. So you can do the auto caption feature, which is okay-ish. But if you put a little bit more effort into it, you can actually change and update the captions for your YouTube video, which makes it more useful. Okay, so why don't we do sign language? So that's another approach. People have been doing that, but sign language is fortunately or unfortunately not universal. So you can't assume that people speak the same sign language. Even within the US, I think there are different dialects of sign language. So that doesn't help you a lot. Of course, you have the same problem with English. And it's just a lot of extra work. So usually here, captions make more sense. But this is another way of thinking about accessibility. So there's all kinds of cool captioning software available. Amara, for example, which you can use. Which also allow you, for example, crowdsource videos. So people are thinking about making this stuff accessible. Also, it's nice because you now can watch videos in the lecture without disturbing you, right? So you just play without the sound. So this is another way that people are actually using stuff that are making more accessible outside of the direct accessibility context. Okay, so we've been talking about visual impairments and about auditory impairments. Motoric impairments were also mentioned. So there's all kinds of assistive technologies that you might have never seen because they are very individual. Because motoric impairments have a larger spread, let's say, there are different types of things. So this is, for example, a mouse stick. This is a way that people that can move their neck can still use a mouse, basically. Superman, I think, also used something similar. You have the Stephen Hawking thing, where I think he uses his eyes to recognizing the iris, to recognize where he's looking on the screen and where he can make selections based on a sort of predefined keyboard. There's this thing, the sip and pop switch, is actually quite common. So this is for people that cannot move at all but can still breathe. So here you can actually sip and puff into a little straw, which is detected by this box and can be turned into a digital signal, which could allow you to actually slowly but surely interact with technology. Eye tracking one I already mentioned from Stephen Hawking. So there's all kinds of other ones that are available. Voice recognition is maybe an obvious one. So people have been using this also in contexts where they can't use their hands. For example, when you're driving, right? So don't access the Wikipedia page. Try to go to Wikipedia when you're driving. But people that are using the same technology also in this context. So there are many of these examples. And you know, you can't think about all of these possible technologies when you're designing your website. Is my thing valid for mouse sticks? Is my thing valid for skip and puff switch? So this is why it's easier to just adhere to good standards of design. Because then you might assume that the people who are developing this hardware and software will make sure that it works for the websites that are properly designed. Right? So it's sort of a give and take situation. Okay, so cognitive or learning disabilities, this is the largest group, right? So there's a very large group of people with all kinds of cognitive difficulties, might not even be impairments or disabilities as such, but cognitively we're even more different than physically probably. And so it's very difficult to make definitive recommendations, but there are a list of them. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's like I think 3 pages with very small text. We're just going to start at the top. So I mean, the easiest is just keep it simple, right? So the simpler you make your content, or the more easily accessible you make your content, the easier it is for people that have trouble in the first place accessing it. So this is hopefully it's a self-evident evident truth, and it also helps people that do not have cognitive disabilities, right? So there's no need to overly complicate your super cool interface or your content. So consistency helps, so making sure that people can expect what is where helps for people, for example, you can imagine with screen magnifiers, if they know that always on the right there's this button that takes them to the next page. If it's suddenly, because you think it's nicer, it's on the bottom, then it takes them much longer to find it. Transformability is important, so this is also for the other types of disabilities, but making sure that your text can be increased or enlarged so that people can read it more easily helps also with this cognitive disability. Just going to go one further. Like simple language, I think these are sort of elaborations of the keep it simple, so I'm going to leave those for the offline reading. This one is a bit more obscure. This is the rivers of white thing. So this is, people have been knowing this from non-web design and typography for a long time, right? So how do you make these books? And if what they know is if you have these rivers of white, it's not a really big river, but if you let me get my pointer out. Right, so if you see here, you see sort of a vertical river, which is actually distracting, and you can see that people if you have lots of these rivers of white, people read your text much slower. Right, so think about how that would work in your web page. But more than that, I want to say that a lot of this stuff we already know because it's just annoying for us, and we read it slower. So it's even more annoying for people that come from a different starting point. Okay, so I think most of these are sort of understandable, and you can follow why we want those. And then I also talked about error and error prevention. So errors will happen, but it's good to limit the amount of errors because it makes it very hard to recover from any errors that you make. So it's things that the website does if you don't know exactly what's happening. So you giving feedback to what the user did is very important. It's like good design principles anyway. But it's really good to sort of also allow if people make errors that they can actually get back. So also like the previous slides, you don't have to be able to reproduce each of these points of cognitive disability, but to give you an idea on what's happening here. Yeah. So avoid background sounds. So again, just do it. Just don't do it because everybody finds it annoying. This isn't just another reason, right? So some of these things are not really specifically for accessibility sake. Okay, so we've looked at the 4 types of disabilities and what ways of mitigating the risk there are. And again, we come back every time. Okay, if you just do normal design, you're almost there. So right, so this is again sort of repeating that point. So if you look at any sort of design blog or a how to do web design course in 2 days or any of these types of things, you will always find very similar principles, right? To use color consistently, to use contrast wisely, to make sure that text stands out and is easy to read. To use this repetition, which is sort of the predictability thing. To use proximity as a hint for things that are semantically also close. So if you use these things, then you're already thinking about these people with cognitive disabilities specifically. Okay, so that's something that you can look at. Okay, so just a few closing remarks before we move to the much needed break. So this is a common misunderstanding, and I just want to take it out today. So you already saw this in the video from the screen reader guide, that it doesn't mean that providing your users with the text-only version, which is something that you saw a lot actually, just give me the text-only version, is actually the way of solving this accessibility problem. Because it might only solve one issue, and actually we saw in the screen reader thing that the semantic markup really helps. So it tells the whatever device you're using, whether it's a normal web browser or a mobile browser or a huff and puff switch, these are things that you can use to maneuver through the page in a more effective way. Right? So don't use the text-only version, use the semantic tags, what they're used for. Right? Okay, so this is basically this one. Yeah, and then again we come to this point. I mean, it's not just because Tim Berners-Lee tells us that we can't use H2 tags just because we want to make the text larger. It's also for these reasons, for the device independence reasons. Okay, so and I've been talking about large groups of people, and of course you might say, well, you know, if there's people with cognitive disabilities are all different, but people with visual impairments also, and there might be people with multiple. So why not? Can we not strive for like a personal assistant for every person? So personalized design. This is actually a line of research or a line of development that you want to have more, let's say, personal agents that take you through information. That is a way that you can do this. But this is very difficult to build. So this is something that we're just not ready for. It's difficult to maintain. It's difficult to know what your users want and look like. It's very expensive to build them. So if you build them for people with one type of disability, then you have to build a very adaptive system because all these people are different. And then you have to have another type of system for people with completely different ones. So basically, it is an approach, but it's not really a feasible one, both economically and we don't know exactly how to do this yet. So basically, simple, non-personalized design which conforms to these rules is often the only feasible and the best route. Okay, so one thing that I want to show you, and I'm asking of you to actually have a close look at after this lecture, is the WCAG guidelines. So this is the W3C recommendation or the rules for guidelines is the best word, sorry, for is accessibility. So I just want to have a quick look at this, because here's actually what the W3C, like the big bosses of the web, want you to do. Let's look at this. So this is the document that's linked from the slides, and actually here you can see. So this is basically what I've been presenting is repeated in this document. Oh, sorry, I'm all the way to the bottom. So this is a document where they talk about this perceivability, operability, understandability, and robustness. And they talk about what you should actually do, like what you should technically do to make sure that it's useful. And they do this in the form of principles and guidelines. And then sort of under this are headings on what you should actually add to specific text. So for example, we have 1.1.1 for non-text content. All non-text content that's presented to the user has a text alternative that serves equivalent purpose. So some way of doing this, giving the information, except for the situations listed below. And if you do that, you get level A. Right? And you have 3 levels, level A, double A, and triple A, which have increasing adherence to these guidelines. So if you say, I'm a 1A website, you claim that you adhere to all of these guidelines. And legal systems can use this to say, okay, well, we assume that every web page that is about university education in the US adheres to level A. And then you have to do that for all the guidelines. So have a look what they look like. Mostly it's a repetition of what I've been saying. Alright, so this is 1.1. The guideline says supply a text equivalent for non-textual elements. So basically that means use the alt attribute. Text should be functional, so that actually helps you to read this. Alright, so this is an example on how to use it. This is a dynamic, or what they call it, animated dynamic image. So it actually shows the stock markets, for example. So for a visually enabled user, you can see, well, it's at this level roughly. It doesn't really help you because I can't see the numbers, but right, and it's rising. So that's nice, but if I don't see this and I don't have an alt attribute, I have no idea what this image means. So one example is I use the alt of this image is, that's actually IX index, so the stock index. The value is 351.43, and the graph, this is a graph and it's updated until 410. Right? Is this exactly the same information? No, because here we have a timeline and we might have some different things. Is it equivalent information? I would say so. So it's similar bits. And then also you have this long desk attribute which you can use to point to more updated, more detailed information. Right, so this is a fairly complicated example, but in simple images you just say description, or what is it? Photo of my house, or my other cat again. Okay, and let's just see what we'll do. I think we have a break here, and then in 50 minutes we're actually going to do what I promised, is look at the free website again and see how we are all doing. Okay, see you in 15 minutes.